One bullet, one farmhouse, one painter, one secret. One Nazi. May 1945. A Jewish paratrooper finds the man who called for his extermination. He's holding a paintbrush, not a gun. That's the disguise. One question decides if Julius Streicher lives or dies today. This is the true story history books shrink into one sentence. By the end, you'll know exactly what happened in that Jeep. You'll hear his real last words, screamed from a scaffold. You'll understand why propaganda itself became a war crime. This isn't a movie script. Every detail is documented fact. Henry Plitt jumped into Normandy before dawn on D-Day. He jumped into Holland weeks later, wounded 4 times total. Then he hunted the man behind the world's most hateful newspaper. 500,000 Germans read that newspaper every single week. Its slogan, "The Jews are our misfortune," printed on every page. Streicher didn't hide in a bunker. He hid in plain sight. He called himself Joseph Saylor, a humble alpine landscape painter. One American major saw through the lie in seconds. What happened next changed how the world punishes hate speech. Stay for the Jeep ride, it's the most tense part. Stay for the trial, it set a legal precedent still used today. Stay for his final words. They will genuinely shock you. This story connects Normandy, Dachau, and a Nuremberg gallows. One soldier's restraint became a cornerstone of international law. No dramatization needed. The real events are stranger than fiction. Press play and meet the man who refused to become a murderer. Here is the full researched, minute-by-minute story now. Henry Plitt was born in New York City in 1918. He grew up Jewish in an America still riddled with quiet anti-Semitism. He studied at Syracuse University, then earned a law degree at St. Lawrence. Most law graduates in 1941 were not training to jump from planes. Plitt joined the legendary 101st Airborne Division instead of a law firm. The 101st became famous as the Screaming Eagles of World War II. Paratroopers had one of the highest casualty rates of the entire war. Plitt trained knowing most of his unit might not survive Europe. On June 6, 1944, he jumped into darkness over Normandy, France. D-Day paratroopers often landed miles from their intended drop zones. Many drowned in flooded fields under the weight of their own gear. Plitt survived the chaos and fought through the hedgerows of Normandy. Weeks later, he jumped again into Operation Market Garden in Holland. That operation is remembered today as a bridge too far. It remains one of the costliest airborne operations in military history. Plitt was wounded 4 separate times during his combat service. 4 Purple Hearts is not a statistic. It's 4 near-death experiences. He also earned the Silver Star for extraordinary battlefield courage. The Bronze Star followed, recognizing further heroic and meritorious action. France later awarded him the Croix de Guerre for valor. The Dutch government honored him with the Order of the Dutch Lanyard. Most soldiers with that record would have gone home satisfied. Plitt's war was not finished when Germany's army started collapsing. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Bavaria, a new mission emerged. Someone had to hunt down escaping high-ranking Nazi officials. Plitt was assigned near Berchtesgaden, Hitler's former mountain retreat. This was the heart of the collapsing Nazi regime's last refuge. Thousands of officials were shedding uniforms and forging fake identities. Farmhouses across Bavaria and Austria hid killers pretending to be peasants. Plitt's job was to find the ones the world wanted most. He had already helped liberate Dachau just weeks earlier. Nothing in training prepares a soldier for what Dachau contained. Survivors were barely alive, their bodies reduced to skeletal frames. Plitt later said the scene would live with him forever. He remembered the ovens, the starving prisoners, the sheer disbelief. That memory did not leave him when the manhunt began. Every Nazi official he now searched for enabled scenes like Dachau. He wasn't hunting abstract war criminals. He had seen the evidence firsthand. His first major capture on this hunt was Robert Ley. Ley led the German Labor Front, a powerful Nazi organization. Captured Nazi prisoners instinctively saluted Ley when Plitt brought him in. Ley later killed himself in his cell before facing trial. That left one name still circling in Plitt's intelligence reports. A tip arrived about a mysterious high-ranking figure near Wadring. Plitt initially suspected it might be Heinrich Himmler himself. He had no interpreter and no jeep of his own that day. He borrowed a jeep, a driver, and pressed forward anyway. 3 men climbed a mountain road toward an unmarked farmhouse. What waited inside would become one of the war's iconic captures. To understand the capture, you first must understand the target. Julius Streicher was born in 1885 in Bavaria, Germany. He started his career as an ordinary elementary school teacher. Nothing in his early biography hinted at future infamy. He served in World War I and earned the Iron Cross. After the war, something in him turned violently anti-Semitic. By the 1920s, he founded a newspaper called Der Stürmer. The name translates roughly to the attacker or the stormer. Der Stürmer became the most notorious propaganda outlet in Nazi Germany. Its front-page slogan read, "The Jews are our misfortune." That line ran on every single issue for over 2 decades. By 1935, circulation had climbed past 500,000 copies weekly. Glass display cases showed the paper on crowded city streets. Bus stops and workplaces had these cases installed deliberately. Reading Der Stürmer became an unavoidable part of daily German life. The content wasn't political commentary. It was dehumanizing caricature. Cartoons depicted Jewish people using grotesque, deliberately inhuman imagery. Historians consider it central to normalizing hatred before the genocide. Streicher rose to become Gauleiter, regional leader of Franconia. That made him a powerful figure in the Nazi party hierarchy. He sat as a member of the Reichstag, Germany's legislature. Even other Nazi leaders found Streicher's extremism uncomfortable at times. He was eventually stripped of some official duties by 1940. Yet his newspaper kept printing hatred until the war's final days. Millions of ordinary Germans absorbed his rhetoric for over 20 years. Propaganda like his didn't pull triggers, but it built permission. It convinced neighbors that genocide was somehow justified or necessary. When the war turned against Germany, Streicher understood his danger. He knew the Allies would come looking for him specifically. Unlike soldiers, he had no uniform to hide behind. His weapon had been ink, words, and relentless public hatred. So Streicher chose the oldest trick available: disappear into anonymity. He shaved his mustache and adopted the alias Joseph Sailor. He claimed to be a simple landscape painter, nothing more. He settled quietly into a farmhouse near Wadring, Austria. The plan relied on one simple hope: nobody would recognize him. Wanted posters with his face were already circulating across Europe. Allied intelligence knew his features from countless propaganda photographs. Still, disguise combined with rural isolation seemed like real protection. For weeks, Joseph Sailor painted alpine landscapes in peaceful obscurity. Locals had no idea their quiet painter published mass hatred. The illusion depended entirely on nobody asking the right question. One American major was about to ask exactly that question. Henry Plitt had studied wanted posters before this mission began. He knew Streicher's face better than most soldiers in Europe. That knowledge was about to collide with Streicher's careful disguise. Two men, two completely different wars, were about to meet. Neither of them knew this meeting would become historic. Late May 1945, Germany had already surrendered unconditionally weeks earlier. Peace existed on paper, but chaos still ruled the countryside. Thousands of Nazi officials scattered into forests, farms, and villages. Some tried crossing borders using forged identity papers and disguises. Others simply waited, hoping the occupation forces would overlook them. Allied counterintelligence teams worked from lists of wanted names. Photographs, physical descriptions, and rumors formed the entire investigation toolkit. No databases, no facial recognition, just instinct and local tips. A tip reached Plitt's unit about a suspicious figure near Wadring. The informant described a high-ranking Nazi hiding in plain sight. Details were vague enough that several names seemed possible. Himmler, the SS chief, was still unaccounted for at that point. Plitt genuinely believed he might be walking into that capture. He lacked his own jeep and lacked a fluent interpreter. Waiting for backup could mean losing the target entirely. He borrowed a jeep and a driver from another unit. 3 men set out up a winding mountain road together. Wadring sat in the Tyrolean Alps, quiet and deceptively peaceful. The farmhouse in question looked like any other rural home. Nothing about its exterior suggested it hid a wanted war criminal. Plitt entered with his .45 pistol drawn, prepared for anything. He climbed the stairs, uncertain exactly who he would find. Inside sat a man calmly painting alpine mountains on canvas. An easel stood beside him, brush in hand, utterly composed. Plitt asked the painter's name without revealing his own suspicion. The man answered smoothly, Joseph Sailor, a simple local artist. Plitt demanded identification papers to confirm the claimed identity. The man produced documents made out precisely to Joseph Saylor. For a moment, the disguise nearly worked exactly as planned. Plitt began asking about Himmler, still convinced he had different prey. The painter insisted he knew nothing about politics or Nazi officials. He claimed to be nothing more than an ordinary local artist. Something about the man's face kept nagging at Plitt's memory. Wanted posters had burned certain features into every soldier's mind. The jawline, the eyes, the shape of the face matched. Plitt studied him more closely, comparing memory against the man before him. The calm painter routine started cracking under sustained direct questioning. Plitt finally said the words that ended the disguise completely. "You look like Julius Streicher," he told the man directly. The reaction was immediate. The mask dropped in an instant. The painter admitted the truth. He was Julius Streicher, one of the most wanted men in post-war Europe, unmasked, no gunfight, no chase, just a question that cut through lies. The most dangerous propagandist of the Nazi era was in custody. A Jewish American officer had personally exposed his hiding place. The press would later call this an extraordinary twist of fate. But the hardest decision of that day hadn't happened yet. It waited in the Jeep ride back to headquarters. Streicher now sat beside Plitt in the back of the Jeep. The mountain road wound downward, away from wagering toward headquarters. For the first time, victor and propagandist sat inches apart. Plitt carried a loaded pistol and complete authority over this man. No witnesses controlled this stretch of empty mountain road. One motion, one moment, and Streicher's story could simply end. Streicher had spent decades calling for his death. Every issue of Der Stürmer had argued men like Plitt shouldn't exist. The temptation to end it right there was real and human. Plitt later admitted he genuinely considered killing Streicher on the spot. Nobody would have easily proven what happened on a remote road. Chaos still reigned across occupied Germany in those early weeks. A dead Nazi propagandist might have raised few serious questions. Revenge, in that moment, would have felt completely understandable. But Plitt made a different choice as the Jeep rolled forward. He chose to deliver Streicher alive to proper military authorities. That decision meant trusting a system that hadn't fully formed yet. The Nuremberg trials didn't officially exist as a concept then. Plitt was betting on future justice instead of immediate vengeance. He understood something larger than his own personal grievance. Executing Streicher quietly would have denied the world crucial evidence. It would have erased the chance to expose propaganda's true danger. A bullet on a mountain road tells no public story. A trial, broadcast to the world, tells an undeniable one. Plitt chose accountability over anonymity, testimony over silence. This single decision changed how history would remember this capture. Streicher arrived at headquarters alive, shaken, and fully identified. Word spread quickly that a Jewish officer had captured him. Newspapers picked up the story almost immediately worldwide. Plitt became an unexpected celebrity practically overnight because of it. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention at the time. The man who spent decades demonizing Jews was captured by one. That single fact carried enormous symbolic weight across the world. It wasn't planned poetry. It was simply how events unfolded. Streicher now faced something he had never faced: due process. The very legal system he mocked would now judge him fairly. Unlike his victims, he would receive an actual defense and trial. This contrast became central to how Nuremberg justified its existence. The Allies wanted to prove they were different from the Nazis. Executing captives without trial would have undermined that entire message. Plitt's restraint in that Jeep embodied the principle before it existed. He didn't know it yet, but he had preserved crucial evidence. Streicher's testimony, however disturbing, would help define new legal boundaries. The next stop wasn't a firing squad. It was a courtroom. And that courtroom would make history in ways nobody predicted. What happened at Nuremberg reshaped international law permanently. It's still cited in courts and tribunals to this very day. Let's step into that courtroom and see what happened next. The Nuremberg trials began in November 1945 in occupied Germany. 21 senior Nazi officials sat as defendants before international judges. Julius Streicher was among them, despite holding no military command. He had never given an order to kill a single person. His weapon had always been words printed on cheap newsprint. Prosecutors faced a genuinely difficult legal question because of this. Could speech and publishing alone constitute a prosecutable war crime? No international precedent existed for punishing propaganda this way before. Streicher's defense argued he was simply a journalist expressing opinions. Prosecutors argued his newspaper directly incited genocide for over 20 years. They presented decades of Der Stürmer issues as direct evidence. Cartoons, headlines, and articles were read aloud in the courtroom. The tribunal examined whether dehumanizing language enables mass violence. Historians and psychologists testified about propaganda's role before atrocities. The prosecution's argument was chillingly simple and difficult to refute. Genocide requires public permission before it can happen at scale. Streicher spent 2 decades manufacturing exactly that public permission. The tribunal ultimately agreed with the prosecution's central argument. Streicher was found guilty of crimes against humanity for incitement. This wasn't a punishment for opinions the tribunal simply disliked. It was a ruling that propaganda can function as a weapon. The court established that inciting genocide is itself a crime. You don't need to pull a trigger to be held responsible. This precedent didn't disappear after Streicher's trial concluded. It later influenced international law on hate speech and incitement. Rwandan genocide tribunals decades later cited similar incitement principles. Radio broadcasters who incited the 1994 genocide faced comparable charges. Nuremberg's ruling on Streicher became a foundational legal reference point. It proved words alone can carry criminal responsibility for atrocities. Streicher was sentenced to death by hanging for his crimes. He remained defiant throughout the trial, showing little visible remorse. Witnesses described him as erratic, sometimes almost proud of his rhetoric. Other defendants reportedly found his behavior uncomfortable and embarrassing. Even convinced Nazis seemed unsettled by his open extremism. The verdict confirmed what Plitt's restraint had made possible. A public trial exposed the machinery behind the Holocaust's ideology. It documented on the record exactly how hatred was manufactured. That documentation still exists today in preserved trial transcripts. Students and historians study these records to understand propaganda's danger. Streicher's case remains a core example in genocide studies curricula. The lesson wasn't only about one man's cruelty and hatred. It was about how ordinary media can normalize the unthinkable. After sentencing, only one final chapter of this story remained. October 1946 would bring the execution of Julius Streicher. His final moments would become almost as infamous as his trial. What he said on the scaffold still puzzles historians today. Let's walk through those final minutes, exactly as they happened. October 16, 1946. Nuremberg prison, early morning hours. 10 condemned Nazi officials were scheduled for execution that night. Streicher was among the last to walk toward the gallows. Witnesses described him as unusually agitated compared to other defendants. Some accounts say he resisted, shouting as guards led him forward. He reportedly praised Adolf Hitler even in his final moments. Then came words that stunned everyone present in that room. Streicher shouted Purimfest 1946 just before the trapdoor opened. Most witnesses had no idea what those words even meant. Purim is a Jewish holiday celebrating survival against ancient persecution. The story of Purim involves a villain named Haman. Haman planned to exterminate the Jewish people in ancient Persia. His plot failed, and Haman himself was ultimately executed instead. Jewish tradition celebrates his downfall as deliverance from genocide. Streicher, oddly, knew Jewish history and religious texts fairly well. His final words appeared to draw a direct comparison to Haman. He seemed to view his own execution through that ancient lens. It was less confession and more a bitter, defiant final statement. Even in death, Streicher framed himself as history's latest villain victim. Historians still debate exactly what he meant by those words. Some read it as an admission of his genocidal intentions. Others see it as a final act of unrepentant anti-Semitism. Either interpretation confirms he understood his true role until the end. He was pronounced dead minutes after the trapdoor released. His body was cremated, and the ashes were scattered secretly. Allied authorities deliberately avoided creating any potential shrine or grave. They feared his site could become a rallying point for extremists. That decision still shapes how war criminals are handled today. Der Stürmer, once read by 500,000 weekly, ceased entirely. The propaganda machine that fueled hatred for decades simply vanished. Its legacy, though, survived in law books and history classrooms. Streicher's trial remains cited whenever incitement laws are debated. Modern hate speech legislation still traces roots back to Nuremberg. The case proves ideas, unchecked, can enable unimaginable real violence. And it proves accountability can still follow, even for propagandists. Henry Plitt never sought fame for his role in this story. He returned home, built a career, and rarely discussed the war. Decades later, historians and family recorded his first-hand account. His oral history now lives at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. It preserves, in his own words, that mountain farmhouse confrontation. One decision in a jeep shaped a legal precedent used worldwide. One soldier's restraint outlasted one propagandist's entire hateful career. That's the real ending most retellings of this story skip. Justice, not revenge, is what actually changed the historical record. Vengeance would have ended in silence on a forgotten mountain road. Due process ended in a courtroom the entire world watched. That difference still matters in how we prosecute atrocity today. Keep that distinction in mind as we close this story. So what actually made this story matter for 70+ years? Not the capture alone. Plenty of Nazis were captured similarly. It was the choice made in that jeep afterward. Plitt had every reason, every justification to pull the trigger. He chose evidence over vengeance, testimony over silence. That choice let the world hear exactly how propaganda works. It let prosecutors prove words alone can enable genocide. It created a legal precedent still cited in courts today. Rwanda's tribunals, hate speech laws, incitement cases, all trace back here. One restrained decision on a mountain road did all that. Streicher's final words still puzzle historians decades after his death. But his conviction never puzzled anyone who studied the evidence. 2 decades of dehumanizing propaganda built the permission for genocide. Nuremberg proved that permission building itself deserves punishment under law. Henry Plitt left this of his life mostly out of spotlight. He built a massive theater chain far from his wartime past. Yet his one moment of restraint outlived his entire business career. History remembers restraint more than it remembers rage, eventually. If this story moved you, that's exactly the point of telling it. Real history rarely needs exaggeration to feel unbelievable. The facts alone, researched and verified, carry their own weight. Subscribe if you want more deeply researched stories like this one. Comment below with what surprised you most in this story. Did the Purimfest ending catch you off guard too? Share this with someone who thinks history is boring. These stories deserve to be remembered accurately, not simplified. One soldier, one choice, one legal precedent still used worldwide. That's the legacy of a farmhouse in the Austrian Alps. Thank you for watching this entire research story today. See you in the next one.